Welcome everyone to my professional speaker series, Elysia Allen with Coldwell Banker Oceanside Real Estate here in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. And I am so thrilled and excited to introduce the unicorn, Sarah Michaelwood, lawyer with Sitka Law. Absolutely incredible. You've done wonders for me and my clients, but who better to introduce you than you?
Excellent.
So Sarah, where are you originally from?
Originally, I was born in Maryland, so on the eastern shore of the neighbor to the south. That said, I've been living in Victoria since 1994, so I can't claim that I was born and raised, but I was certainly raised in Victoria. I had a very brief foray back into the States to go to University of Washington, where I did my undergraduate degree in geography.
Wow.
And in that 3 years away, I realized I needed to come back to Victoria. So I ended up back here, went to University of Victoria to get my law degree, and was fortunate enough to find a position in Victoria as a lawyer.
Fantastic. Which kind of, well, I guess that's kind of how you got started. So geography, how did you love geography?
I think it was just a degree that I fell into.
Yes.
At the University of Washington, it was more flexible, so I was able to take courses in environmental studies, in international studies, politics, and then the base geography courses. And I think what was great about that is I feel that I have a very good understanding of space and place and how those pieces interact, which I've often found has been very helpful when helping clients navigate things like charges on title or understanding the plan or where their lot is even located on the legal survey side of things.
Right. Oh gosh, that's a huge foundation. So, serendipity and the stars aligning for you to find your way to the law side of things. So you got started in law. Now, was it real estate law at first?
So in my practice as a lawyer, you always have to start with your articling term. So it's a
Right.
1-year term. During that point in time, you take a 3-month PLTC course. So it's the professional legal training course. And that's where you write the bar and hopefully pass the bar. For most of us, it does go that course of action.
Right.
And at that point in time, I was able to work at a real estate focused firm. So getting the opportunity to be exposed to that side of practice, which was never necessarily my intention. I had never closed anything off. You sort of shut one door at a time with law. When you sort of go through and have the opportunity to see, criminal law did not particularly speak to me. Neither did family law.
Right.
And so eventually you find where you belong. And I think that, like you sort of mentioned, geography laid a very excellent foundation for this practice.
Right.
So did my previous history of engaging in educational opportunities. So I've been a teaching assistant at the University of Washington as well. So just getting that chance to educate and inform clients. Mm-hmm. This sort of intersects with all those areas of life that I enjoy.
Nice.
It's great to work in real estate and development. It has exciting opportunities, and we get the chance as a solicitor to work in that area of practice where you get to develop and explore and engage with clients. I'm not necessarily spending the whole time talking to opposing counsel and taking instructions. I get the chance to work a bit more broadly with other people involved in the industry as well, which is always good fun.
Nice. Oh my gosh. Well, that just opens many doors, and especially for teaching me as well, because Sarah spent many moments on the phone with me to educate myself, because in the work that we do, you learn something new every day.
Yeah.
And when you have trusted professionals that you can reach out to, it allows us to sleep at night. I'm gonna lay that out there. So I guess another big question as a lawyer, you're very motivated and driven. What drives you? What motivates you to do what you do?
I think particularly in this area of practice, education and protection are the two key pillars for our practice. So making sure that a client understands what they're signing, why they're signing it, and how everything is going to play out is so key. And then also taking those steps to make sure that at no point in time do we expose our clients to risk. I think at certain points we've talked about what kind of a clause to include given a certain circumstance. So just making sure that those elements make their way into that contract, that we watch the progression of the closing start to finish, making sure that there's no opportunities for somebody to mislay something or for anything to be misconstrued. So really it's the motivational factors are so key to educate and protect our clients and make sure that it's a pretty significant affair that we're conducting here.
Absolutely.
So for many people, it's the largest purchase that they'll ever make in their lives until perhaps they upgrade in a few years.
Yeah.
So making sure that they feel comfortable during that process, and of course protecting their assets, their home, and all of the money that they're investing at that time.
That's right, because certain keywords can make or break a contract and potentially put clients at risk if it's not worded a particular way. So someone like myself that can reach out to you and just double check, dot the I's, cross the T's, and make sure that you're in harmony, working for the best interests of your client, and moving forward is so important. So, well, that's why, again, I come to her for everything. So I guess describing your business, when did you first join Sitka Law?
I joined back in May of 2017. So at that point in time, Sitka Law Group was just over a year old. So all of the lawyers who were practicing here had more than a year experience, but they decided to start a interdisciplinary solicitor practice. Okay. So focusing on collaborative work. So all firms operate in a different structure and can't really comment on how they organize their affairs, but here the emphasis really is on making sure that there's sort of a zone defense. Right. If I'm away for a day, which happens on occasion, there is other counsel who can cover in my absence. We sort of always have notes to the file to make sure that it's up to date and no one ever falls through the cracks. Nice. And so at that point in time, I joined in 2017. I've been here since. We'll stay here until I'm not allowed by a judge to work anymore, declared mentally incompetent. So yeah, I think it's been a good run so far.
Great, and a great fit. Well, it was fantastic. You brought me in on a tour of just all the different aspects and teams and sections, and because there's a lot of stuff that happens on the back end that you're like magical elves, like it's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, and it takes a team to come together and support each other. And I mean, you were showing me like there's corporate, there's wills, there's estate, there's accountants, and of course conveyancing, which we'll get to, because I know a lot of you want to know about conveyancing, because I didn't realize what conveyancing was before I got into real estate. It's like one of those key words, and even though I had a mortgage before, and I didn't really quite know what that meant.
You weren't educated on that.
Not quite. So I'll dangle that little carrot, as I know it's a big topic that we're going to cover. So now I know a lot of my clients are just beyond thrilled, but what would some of the customers say about your business and working with you?
I think our practice is as client-focused as it can be. There's certain elements that I try really hard to keep in my practice too. So I try to always be punctual. I know that sometimes when you're speaking with people, they feel like they are left in the lobby for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. You're asked to be punctual, and that really should be a two-way street. And sort of going with that is making sure that there's enough time in an appointment. So I want to keep those time blocks almost longer than I actually estimate that they would be, because sometimes people have additional questions. Sometimes they've come in and we've structured something as tenants in common, because that's initially what they thought, but then actually we want to be joint tenants, so we want to change those pieces while they're in the office and make sure that they look at that and they see that it's going to be registered correctly, and that if they have to clarify anything, or if anything, heaven forbid, it was sent to us incorrectly. Sometimes we don't get the most up-to-date mortgage instructions when those rates were dropping and changing rapidly. Right. We want to make sure that we've got everything right, dot the I's, cross the T's, and so that gives us the opportunity to make sure that's done correctly. Right.
Fantastic. Well, and another thing that I can vouch for as well is just how quickly you respond and communicate with folks, because I'll pop in a question, and I know it's quite amazing, the detail and attention that you can give to me so quickly. So Thank you for that.
We do try. It's tough. It's good to have aspirations. I have sort of a goal of 24 hours to respond. Sometimes, you're in circumstances outside your control, but again, clear communication. If I'm not in the office or away on a trial matter or something of that nature, I'd have an out of office directing you to go talk to someone else. And so you know that there's somebody who's going to be picking that up, and you're not just left with nobody to help you in that point in time.
Right. And that's huge in this process, to know that you're safe, you're looked after, and you're going through the right procedures for the transaction at hand. Well, I guess with that, what are some of your greatest challenges?
I think the challenge is time. And in making sure that you do give each file the appropriate amount of time. Sometimes in this practice it's difficult because time is of the essence, and people want answers to the question yesterday, and you potentially are holding up that transaction, and that is where we do play a difficult role sometimes, in that our job is to make sure that everything is correct and proper. It's not necessarily to make the deal go through at that point in time. So if it's, we've got to sign this or they're going to lose it, we want to make sure that we don't rush anything, that we don't miss anything, because the last thing we'd want to have happen is to rush a contract through and then realize that there was something wrong that could have been caught if the appropriate time was given to it. So it's such a delicate balance, and I appreciate that sometimes puts our co-workers here, our realtors, into a difficult position, because we really do want to make sure that we don't let anything out there for risk. And I know you share that same sentiment, and sometimes it's really clients who are rushing us through that process and wanting to make sure that we get it done quickly. But we want to give everything the proper time that it's needed to make sure that it's done correctly.
And that's great, because, well, you've known in the past couple of years that our market's been just so fast-paced and, quick turnarounds, and that's why talking about the conveyancing piece, just making sure all the documents and instructions, these magical pieces of paper, find their way to the right place at the right time.
Yes.
So, well, perfect. So before we get into my questions that I know, I've come across and learned as I've developed in my profession, what are some of the top 3 questions that clients may ask you?
Okay, excellent. There's definitely a lot of questions that clients come with. In terms of looking less specific and more broad, one of the key questions that I get asked is, can I DocuSign at closing? And that is a funny spot. I know that contracts can be DocuSign. That's been accepted, and that quite frequently a majority of the lending documents, depending on who they're working with, those will be DocuSigned as well. And we are sort of stuck working within the parameters of the Law Society rules, as well as the requirements under the Evidence Act. So there are requirements that we do in fact meet in person with a client, so either ourselves or if they're out of town with an agent, so another lawyer we can help coordinate with. But they do have to bring ID and verify, very similar to FinTrack rules, and sign in person in wet ink on some of these forms. And we did have some accommodation during COVID, but we really have to have a direct causal temporal link in order to engage in any of those sort of alternative circumstances. So the majority of the time the answer is no. But that said, I think it's so vital to actually meet and review and, again, give the appropriate gravitas to the situation at hand.
Right. Oh, and as a past Latin student, I really appreciate that. Sorry, on a side point. But no, because you've been very informative to me for my out-of-town clients that might be looking at an investment property, but they might be in Alberta and they can't always come in person. So I love how you try and make it as efficient as possible and still care about their needs that have to happen in person on the other side. So thank you for that. No, so phenomenal question,
So
because
that's one.
That's what, and that's big.
That's a big one. Another question I get asked quite often is if people are calling around looking for an idea of the cost. Sometimes they pose, what's the difference between a lawyer or a notary? There is a conception that a notary costs less, and I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't have an idea of everyone's costs. But the other piece there is, notaries have their permissions under the Notaries Act, and so there's given them the authority to draw and execute documents with clients. So they do have very similar capacities in a conveyancing regard. That said, if there is any need for legal advice, there's a position where that's outside the constraints of their legislation. So if a deal is going sideways at closing, they may need to refer you out to counsel at that time. Again, it's so hard to predict, but that is the main distinction there. So, in terms of operation and standard procedure, typically very similar. There are some circumstances in which a lawyer would need to be involved, even if you already had a notary on board.
Gotcha.
So that is one distinction that I get asked as well.
Okay.
And I think the last question I get asked quite frequently has to do with real estate. So, is it a good buy? It's something I do get asked. And of course, that is a question that involves much more market analysis than I have access to. I think if I was in the moment and looking at properties as well, I'd have an idea. But that's depending on the results of the inspection. That's depending on your own circumstances. There's so many factors that go into that question. So what I can tell you is, do I see any major problems with the title? Is there anything in the contract that's risky? Is there any elements that, sort of foray squarely within the legal side of things? That said, sometimes I will tell clients. I had to tell a client the other week that, I have some concerns about this building scheme on title. And he said, it's okay. So, sometimes I will tell you, I have some apprehension about some of the limitations, and they'll still buy. So,
right.
perhaps my answer as to if it's a good buy is not necessarily the most relevant point.
Right, but at least providing your recommendation or just knowing all the facts to educate and inform our clients, because that's big on the real estate side too. What do you think? Is there a lot of red flags here? Should we run?
Yes.
Yes, no, maybe so.
Yes.
But the back end of the documents are huge, because you've taught me so much about building schemes. Like, if folks have an RV, they may not be able to park it on their driveway.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of nuance once you start to dig into that.
Right. So more to follow. So those are really good questions, and I could totally see that, because I've been asked as well. Oh, lawyer, notary. Well, I know who I always recommend. But okay, so questions from clients. Now, are you ready for mine?
I hope so.
Fantastic. Okay, so hitting up the real estate. An accepted offer is now in place. And maybe we've been battling over multiple offers. Maybe it's been mental. Maybe it's been quiet. But the contract of purchase and sale has been accepted by the seller. I send the paperwork to you guys right away. And I guess my first question before we get into conveyancing is, what are the first steps your office does when that initial communication takes place?
So, of course, we want to open a file right away.
Right.
And in that process, we are going to be looking as well to see if there's a chance that we've been asked to represent the seller.
Okay.
So in a simple conveyance, our office is permitted to represent both parties to a transaction.
Right.
So of course, we do have to obtain consent. So there is potentially a touch point there to reach out to the clients, ensure that they are okay with, perhaps me representing the purchaser,
Right.
and Christian or Group in my office representing the seller. So once we get past that particular threshold, there is a sort of brief informational questionnaire that we send out. So we give some information, and we're also asking for information.
Great.
A lot of what we need is in your contract. It is in the conveyancing instructions that tell us who's representing the other side.
Right.
It's in the mortgage instructions, but there's a little bit of a gap, things like your birth date, your social insurance number. So
Right.
verifying that information. That email also will let the purchaser know who the conveyancer on the file is.
Right.
And the conveyancer is a legal assistant who focuses in real estate transactions. So they help coordinate between the sellers, the lender, potentially the strata. They get the tax certificate information. So they're helping us put together that file the whole time. So it sort of flows in that step process, making
Gotcha.
sure that we can start getting those documents ready. And there's going to be some ongoing correspondence back and forth between our office and the client to make sure we get those details correct. Sometimes there's multiple following up, just depending on how much else is going on for them.
Right.
And getting those pieces ready for the actual signing appointment.
Okay. See, I knew there was more than just the e-introduction. And no, that's incredible, because like in real estate, we can't represent a seller and a buyer. Dual agency was totally eliminated, which I agree with.
I do recall that happening. Yeah.
Yes,
that
and
has been a shift since I've been in practice.
Absolutely, and I can't stress how important that was to remove, because you can't represent both sides without bias, so it's nice to...
Unfortunately for us, when everything has been laid out in a contract and there's
Yes.
really no further negotiation, we just help administer those processes
That's
as agreed.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Sarah, for introducing us to the first steps that your office employs when I send you that paperwork. Now, the big word of conveyancing. Which I know I dangled earlier to you watchers out there. On our side, magical elves working in the background, I get this notification on completion day that such and such an address has completed, and I can legally give the key over. Now, that's very easy on my side of things.
That's good.
But, well, especially if it is completed, that means
yes, that is more helpful.
But what is conveyance? And I know that's a huge question to answer. So what is the conveyancing process? What does it mean?
Of course. So the process in the shortest possible answer is of exchanging title from one party to another. Conveyancing also does encapsulate things like when someone has to refinance, so they've purchased a home and now they're at the stage where either they're changing their lender or renewing their mortgage. So it's a pretty broad area of anything to do that's transactional based with real estate. The process side of things is so key on communication and coordination. So as I sort of alluded to earlier, we're working with the seller's either lawyer or notary to make sure that we have the right documents for them to sign. There's certain documents that a buyer's lawyer is going to prepare to then be signed by the seller, primarily the transfer, which is the key document. And so again, there's that coordination between parties. There's coordination with the client, their lender, their realtor. Sometimes strata is involved. Always confirming property taxes are paid. We want to make sure that we don't have a buyer who now has debts of somebody else or have to follow up with that later. So just getting all of the items together that are needed, because what we're trying to do is prepare a series of documents that are going to affect the transfer, register the mortgage, address any tax components that are needed, primarily focused on property taxes or the property transfer tax. So preparing all of those documents so that the client can come in and sign. The process of conveyancing includes creating something called a statement of adjustments that shows where the money is going from and to, and we go through that with the clients and we let them know in advance, this is the amount that we need to complete. It's always framed slightly differently than they went through with their mortgage broker, but usually that number is coming in fairly close to expected. Otherwise, we've got some sort of issue that we need to address at that stage as well.
Right.
After the signing appointment, we will take everything that we have and proceed to registration. So again, there's more interplay between us and whoever's representing the seller, more work with the lender. So there's a lot of touch points that go back and forth, and it really is very communication heavy. And on the actual closing date, the land title office is an electronic platform. So we submit everything to them and we know instantaneously that it's been accepted. There hasn't been any issues. It does take a while to fully register, but effective at that point in time, we consider the deal done on our end and pay the funds over to the seller's lawyer, who then is able to report and pay out their mortgage.
Right. And then I get that magical word of completion.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's in a very condensed form. That is the process of a conveyance from a purchaser perspective.
Excellent. Well, that's great for me to know as well, because I know every property is, case by case, or like, for example, we were talking about moorage and
Yes.
leasing, and you were great in saying, oh gosh, pop in a contract either before or after completion to ensure that documents and communications can come for the benefit of your client.
Yes, the foreshore matter. Yes.
Yes. So, That's why you are you. So yes, lots of components coming together. And now, ideal time frames for conveyancing. In a perfect world, how much time would you love?
In a perfect world, it would be several months. I think the more time that's possible, and again, it all comes down to the fact that the conveyancing at the legal side of things is the last piece of the puzzle.
Right.
So we are after the contract is done, we're after the mortgage is approved and underwritten, and sometimes that stage can take a bit longer. We're going to be waiting on pieces from, and we need to know who's representing the other side. We need to have all of the details for the lender. So in terms of timeline, it's just checking actually when it comes to the lender side of things and making sure we have adequate time. Usually a month is fairly typical. If we can get a contract and those other documents a month ahead, we've got plenty of time. We've done it with less. But really, we want to focus on that. And again, each transaction is different. If someone's doing a cash purchase and we're not waiting for mortgage instructions, well, we can turn that around a lot quicker. Sometimes it depends on the time of the month. A lot of people like to purchase the last day of the month or the 15th. So if it's an odd day, if it's a day where there's not much going on, we have less competition with getting lender funding. We've got an easier time getting into the bank. So in terms of just what other pieces we can get in place so that deal can go as smoothly as possible for those clients.
Excellent.
It does inevitably feel a little tight on their end because typically we're giving them the bank draft information just a few days before closing. But that is sort of because of all those pieces that go into what needs to create that particular piece of information.
Okay, so for all you realtors checking in on this, pick some weird days, not always the 15th and the last of the month. Or holidays, watch out for those.
Yes, holidays are tricky. The 30th of September this year was difficult for a lot of people because contracts were already in existence.
Right.
But yes, holidays, weekends, sometimes those pop up. And I guess, again, it's just a matter of the client says they want a certain date and they throw it in and we just need to double check that it's not a Sunday.
My gosh, weekends, no.
If the land title office is closed, there's nothing we can physically do to effect that transfer.
I believe it. I mean, I know you can work magic, but that's a tough one to swing.
Yeah.
So perfect. No, that's good feedback for me because you're right. End of month is usually a favorite time. So.
And again, sometimes that's what a seller says. I need it to be this day,
right.
And we completely understand, and we want to make everything work as much as possible. But if there is that flexibility, it's going to help everybody.
Which is perfect because we want seamless and as stress-free as possible.
Yes, as possible.
Well, that's great. So when you meet with clients to sign title transfer and all the magical documents, how soon do you meet with folks to do that? I've had that quite a bit.
Yeah. So that's typically just a few days prior to closing.
Right.
So again, there is some element of we can try to do it earlier if necessary. If someone's going out of town. I did sign up a purchase, I think a couple weeks ago, that was closing December 1st. But that was very fortunate because the lender was able to instruct us so early, and that's not always the case.
Right.
So that's where it becomes very common practice. A couple days before your closing, you're going to meet. We're going to verify your ID, take your bank draft, and sign everything that we need to sign. So those pieces are usually very, very close temporally, and sometimes people get nervous, but that is the normal course of things. I think every conveyancing department operates very similarly across BC.
Right. No, fair enough. And with IDs, I guess one thing I know that we look for, and I'm sure you do the same, is the expiry date. So don't bring something that's going to expire before the completion of the transaction.
Yes, and then, sometimes as well, I had a couple circumstances where people didn't have the ID that was needed. So right now, people are not renewing passports, but a government photo ID. If you don't have a driver's license or a health card, we need something there to verify. And again, it's not just because we want to confirm for ourselves. Your lender is going to have that responsibility. They require us to usually fill out a form that says I did meet with them, I did review their ID, and I have to sign that as an agent. And the Law Society has very strict rules regarding the process of funds coming through our trust account. So it's not just arbitrary rules, they are very significant.
Yes, oh, absolutely. Well, that's perfect because I know same with our trust accounts holding deposits, and it's So with all of your services, because I know this is always a big question, oh, lawyers, everyone kind of panics and they kind of worry about costs. And I know that's one thing realtors should be educating folks is it's not just the purchase price of a home, it's closing costs, it's insurance, it's conveyancing fees, stuff like that. Now, how much would your services possibly be for a real estate transaction?
And so some of that is circumstantial. So there's different price for a sale versus a purchase versus a refinance. So I do always recommend people, if they have concerns about cost, to check before they're even at the stage where they've got an offer in. We can get an idea of what they're doing and how much we think that would cost. The other piece that I always want to flag, and I know sometimes gets missed, is that there are elements called disbursements. And a disbursement is a cost that we would have to pay in order to make the transaction happen. So obtaining a tax certificate, obtaining title insurance for the lender, registering the transfer at the land title office now costs $75.22. Same thing for the mortgage. If it's a rental property, the assignment of rents costs the same. So you can see how disbursements actually can add up. And it is a little circumstantial. If you don't have a mortgage, that amount drops and changes in some way. So I do always recommend, if people are calling around and getting quotes, make sure that disbursements are either contemplated or addressed in some way, because sometimes things can get sort of misconstrued, and we want to make sure that we avoid any miscommunication on that side of costs, because the costs should be fixed and they should be known, because you've budgeted and you're trying to buy, a new refrigerator on top of this all. So we understand that when it comes to this, I don't want clients to be sitting here sort of watching the clock, making sure that they don't take too much time. We want to have that number in advance and not deviate from it.
Absolutely fantastic. Disbursements.
Yes.
That's a good term. Well, fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time for part one. Just brace yourselves, you guys. We're going to have Sarah for part two. And, just to go over your introduction, to talk about conveyancing, what the office does. And, I really appreciate that. So stay tuned. We're going to be diving into unconditional offers, stratas, military relocations. So stay tuned, folks. Thanks for joining us on this installment with Sarah, with Sitka Law, Elysia Allen with Coldwell Banker Oceanside Real Estate. We'll talk to you soon.